Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Strategy Gap. Today's conversation should be a fun one around all things strategy, what makes a strategy, what isn't a strategy, and how to adjust your strategy based on your market that you're in. Joining us for the conversation today is Alok Tewari. He brings a diverse background that includes over 20 years of experience in strategy and global business transformations related to the insurance, engineering, and technology domains. He's an extremely well studied guest as he's a mechanical engineer, a chartered property and casualty underwriter, has his master's in insurance management from Boston University, and he recently completed a doctorate in management from the University of Maryland. But that's not it. He also is currently pursuing a law degree from UConn School of Law. Today, he's a member of the operational leadership team at his organization, where he helps develop and implement strategies and assists leadership in facilitating a strong environment of accountability by overseeing the reporting and tracking. He acts as a key sponsor and advocate for initiatives where he helps identify and create new opportunities for operational excellence and business growth. Alok, welcome to the show.
Jonathan and Joe, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So, we went into a little bit in the introduction, but in your experience, you have a vast domain expertise. You've been able to see a wide variety of different strategies. One thing Joe and I see a lot, and that we've talked about with other leaders, is that strategy means something different to everybody and to every organization. And many of the times, strategies aren't really strategies. In your mind, from your expertise, how do you define strategy? What is and what isn't a strategy?
That's an excellent question to start with. Uh, Strategy is something that an organization creates to attain specific goals. It's not one size fits all. Strategy can be an operational strategy, a data strategy, a technology strategy, a marketing strategy, a sales strategy. But strategy overall, all strategies in an organization, they need to tie to attain a specific goal. A strategy which many people mistake for a project plan is not a project plan. Strategy is something, what do we want to ultimately accomplish? I'll give you an example. Anything that we do within an organization, ultimately, there are few reasons of why we exist. One of the primary reasons is, of course, to make our customers successful. But in order to do that, we also want to make money. With those as the guiding principles, customer success and revenue generation, we work backwards and create multiple kinds of strategies, whether it's sales or marketing or behind the scenes operational or any revenue generation product or technology. One of the things which I've really seen in my experience is, while we have multiple departments and every department has their own strategy, somewhere, somehow, they all need to come together in order to work for that one North Star that the companies are striving for. One of the questions was that what is not strategy, and I alluded that strategy is not a project plan, strategy is not project management. It's much bigger than that. It's entering into the realms of the unknown. What can be accomplished, what cannot be accomplished, can we define that? That in a nutshell at a high level is how I perceive what strategy is.
And I appreciate that perspective. And you mentioned the idea of what a strategy is, and I think we all can agree that a project might be the result of a strategy, but they're not the same. They're not synonymous. But you mentioned that every strategy that's been selected, even if it's by different departments, should align to a North Star. And when you say it makes me think a singular. But in your perspective, is there how many numbers? Like, what is the perfect number of priorities an organization should have before you start to lose focus? Is it one? Is it five? Is it three? What have you seen be generally the sweet spot? Because most of the clients we work with struggle with having too many things they want to focus on and can't cull the list down to a more manageable number.
So, the number of strategies that we can focus on depends upon the vantage point we sit at. For a CEO is thinking 5 to 10 years ahead, and that CEO may have multiple focus areas that person may want to drive, which then ultimately feeds down to different departments. Someone sitting within a department may have 5 to 7 key objectives or key strategies that they want to work on, but that may be too much. It depends upon the size of the department as well. Uh, let's take a startup. If it's a startup and if the founder and CEO who is just bootstrapping it, they need, in my opinion, they need to have one core strategy that they're working towards. But if it's an established organization with multi-billion dollars in revenue, uh, they can have the luxury of having multiple strategies. Again, it depends upon the vantage point you sit in. In my opinion, what I have personally experienced is if I'm working with anywhere more than 3 core areas, my focus tends to get diluted. And that's where every day morning I reassure myself that these are the 3 areas I'm working on. Rest everything else is tactical operational tasks that just need to happen. That's part of the job. But the focus areas are these three over a horizon of anywhere from 18 to 36 months.
Got it. Yeah, you mentioned one key point there. Outside of identifying the number of things that are important, it's finding a way to separate those operational aspects from the strategic aspects. I know in my experience, I've talked with several leaders and organizations, and they talk about their plans, and it's a bunch of things that, hey, we want to continue doing this, or we want to slightly improve this, or it's the things that are keeping the lights on, and that therefore is their strategic plan. How do you take a step back and separate those more operational, keeping the lights on things from the truly transformative actions or initiatives that are going to change the direction of where you're headed?
That, that, that's a great point that you raised, because that comes into the realms again of what is strategy versus what is a transformational activity versus what is keep the lights on running projects that we have to do. And that's where the key really comes in is, and people talk about transformation as strategy, strategy about as transformation, and so as initiatives as a small strategy that I'm working on. But ultimately, it's all about the big picture. What are we really aiming for? If we are talking about launching a new product strategy is completely different than having just a small business which is not making money. How do we turn it around? How do we transform? That's an operational organizational strategy versus in the previous example, that's a product strategy. So again, it depends upon what is it that we truly want to accomplish. Like one of the areas I'm working on is that for one of our engineering products, what's that new market that we should explore? And when we are starting with such a broad brush that what's that new market, on a map of the world, we can pick up any country we want to get in. And that's where the strategy is: what is our product? Where is our market? Where is our customers? Who is a competitor, how much market does the competitor have, and then we zero down on a particular area that this is a place where we should go ahead and hire, let's say, few employees, set up an office and go all in over there. So it all depends upon the ultimate goal that we want to accomplish, and how we want to accomplish, but it all drills down from the top level leadership and how we come down.
And so the name of the podcast is The Strategy Gap. So I think you've done a nice job explaining about what strategies should be selected and how many, and depends on the life cycle of the company. But the issue sometimes is the ability to then take those strategies and make them become a reality. And so, what have you seen leaders do to effectively give their people space to execute the strategy? Because many times it's deemed as a strategy that's given to somebody is something in addition to their day job. Because you mentioned keeping the lights on. Some organizations, that's their main job. If they're working in healthcare, they're working in certain industries, there truly is a need to keep the lights on. And then whatever time you have left over in your infinite free time, work on this other thing. We know that doesn't work. So, from your experience or from things you've seen, how have leaders carved out enough time for people to actually give a strategy its proper attention so that it increases its chance of actually getting executed?
I think you have raised an excellent point over here, and that's something which I've in my career I've seen in multiple organizations, that we sit in a room for few weeks or few months, we come up with a strategy, we give it to a department to execute, and it dies. I've been on the consulting side as well, and as a consultant, as a management consultant, we interacted with multiple customers and gave them strategies on how either they need to expand their market or transform their department or a technology strategy. And again, 6 months later, it has died down. So in my current role, my role right now is strategy and execution. And I was absolutely adamant that I want to add the word execution because I don't want to again repeat what has happened past in my life. Strategies die. I want to make sure that there is continuity. Now, from a departmental leadership perspective, a true leader truly understands that to really do something transformative to attain a particular strategy, you have to stay with it, or you need to dedicate some people to it. You need to have some kind of a reporting or a metrics to report back on how we are doing. Also, it depends upon the time horizon. Anything, again, in my experience, anything that spans more than a year or so will tend to get diluted when we get through the 4 seasons of any organizational life cycle. But anything which is crisp, anywhere from 90 days to maybe 180 days, if we want to accomplish something, that's definitely accomplishable. So again, it's from a department leader perspective. It's bringing that execution mindset, that reporting mindset. What are the key KPIs that we are trying to accomplish? Putting them as part of the operational reports and just keeping an eye on it will make sure that that strategy comes to fruition. And then again, it's not just about creating a strategy and then working on it. As we start working on it, there will be a need to refine the strategy. It's a continuous planning mechanism, and there are instances wherein if you're trying to work with a new technology, we may realize 4 months later that maybe this is not the right time for the technology, or maybe we are too ahead of our time. It may not make enough money for us, and that's where that continuous thinking about strategies is really essential.
Yeah, and that tees up a good conversation point. There is, it's important to understand the time frame and who's working on what, and focus on execution. But you get to a certain course in the road, and you need to understand, hey, is this strategy actually working? Is it not? Do I need to change course? Do I need to continue on the same course and just apply different sort of resources? How have you been able to identify across your strategies and initiatives, in a simple way, what's working and what's not?
So in my job, in my day-to-day job, one of my tasks is I have to continuously talk with all the department leaders, with all the areas where strategies are being formulated. Because you would realize that even in a small organization, there are silos that get developed, as well as there are pet areas of leaders, and they don't want to lose control of those areas. So in my organization and in my day-to-day job, it's not just about the strategy that I and my department have created. It's about working with our other partners, working with our vendors, with our customers and other departments, trying to see what are they trying to accomplish within their purview, and then see where do the alignments exist. But with that said, theoretically, a true strategy is something which thinks through all the possibilities, all the risks that may come in, but then that becomes too time consuming. In a practical day to day work, we have to formulate something, we have to get started, and we have to see whether it sticks in the market or not. So, to answer your question, Jonathan, it's about that continuous conversation which is essential. Keep talking with others, keep talking about how to align everyone's strategy, and as an organization, are we really marching in one direction? Are we really trying to accomplish together, or are we stepping on each other? And in the course of those conversations, that uh, course correction and course alignment automatically happens.
Got it. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I think one thing that, diving a bit deeper in there, most organizations and most leaders would agree, I think, in the intention of what you're saying, but when it actually comes down to how do I best connect across the organizations, how do I regularly have these conversations to stay aligned? People just get too busy, so it's impossible to stay focused on what strategies. And I guess a different word of strategies. What ways have you continuously focused on that communication so that you're not 1 month down the year and you all of a sudden that goal is like your New Year's resolution, that goal of staying better connected is now by the wayside?
Uh, it happens. What you have mentioned actually happens. So it's one of the ways. Really, is it has to drill down from top to the bottom. Their organizational objectives, their organizational focus areas, OKRs is something in certain departments that we manage. It's all about, do we have the right level of objectives from each area? Are those objectives aligned? And if objectives are aligned, then we start drilling down that to attain those objectives, what are we really working? What's tactical? What's a project versus what's a long term strategy? Uh, there's something called as a key topics. As leaders within the organization, we do get together and we talk about those key topics. That are those key topics still relevant? Are they satisfying the objectives that we defined for the year? Are we still on track with those? And then we have a department, we have a reporting and a financial planning and analysis area. The job is to make sure that they keep the leaders on track. For every objective that we create, there also are two things that go hand in hand. One is a cost benefit analysis that we do with every strategy or every objective we want to achieve, as well as what is the financial gain that would come from that particular strategy. Can there be a financial gain? Many times there are not, because we are venturing into the unknown. But if there is, can we measure those? Are there any metrics on a quarterly basis we can do that? Now, this is over and above, outside of the entire organizational operational areas which are happening. PMO is one area which manages projects. It's outside of PMO, outside of operations. It's more at a strategic level with the leaders, trying to monitor the objectives, monitor key topics, and see are we on track with them or not.
And you bring up a good point that we have on this podcast quite a bit, the idea of actually developing metrics for your various items. You mentioned sometimes you can't have a financial return. There are certain things in business that are just the cost of doing business. Maybe you're able to take expense out of the system, but you're not creating new revenue. But sometimes many of our clients struggle with the idea that there isn't any metric that's developed for a strategy. And at the end of the day, they're just, I think the strategy is working. It's more of a conversation versus a math problem. And so, have you developed any sort of frameworks to make it easier to develop metrics that make sense? And even better, I think the utopia would be that everybody has a similar set of metrics for each of the strategies, depending on, doesn't depend on the department. They're all doing it in a uniform manner. So, I guess two-part question: have you found a way to make it easy for people to like say, here are the metrics I'm being tied to, and have you had any success then making them uniform across every department, so that when you're meeting, it's not like you're singing from different sheets of music?
So, unfortunately, not.
Okay.
I wish there
I
was.
tried. I was like, all right, maybe he cracked it. I mean, I know it's a tough one.
No, it's not there, and I wish there was something over there. It's let me get to the definition of strategy. For everyone, the word strategy means something or the other. There's no common definition of strategy. For someone, just working as part of their day-to-day job and maybe making a sales call and trying to get that customer, they might say my sales strategy is working, the customer is responding back. Versus another department which is trying to launch a completely new innovative product, that's their strategy. So no, I wish there was some uniformity, not just within the organization but within the industry as well, and a systematic way to monitor it. I have not seen it. I wish something like that existed. It would make reporting and tracking so much simpler. If for nothing else, it would actually help in killing the initiatives which are not working, on which we are just dragging our resources.
Yeah, the idea that the idea of sunk costs coming into play, where people hold on to a project or an initiative that is aligned to a strategy longer than they probably should have, because
True.
they don't want to admit defeat, or they don't want to act like the decision they made in January. They think that every decision that was made in that boardroom for those few weeks that you mentioned is somehow going to exist in reality and not have any scrutiny. I mean, for every good idea we have, bad news can happen, and we just have to be honest. And most people probably would admit they hold on to something a little longer than they probably should, in the hopes of maybe not losing face or having a certain way. So I think if you apply what you mentioned earlier, if the metrics are all agreed upon for a particular strategy are not trending, and we're saying over the course of a few months, not some quick decision, that we all feel comfortable then pulling the ripcord, that's easier said than done. I don't think most people would actually agree to that, because there's implications. But in a perfect world, and we're talking about in this podcast, what we can aspire to be, people would be evolved enough to say, I really thought this strategy was going to work. We're 6 months in. Every metric is telling us it isn't. We're going to stop spending money on this and shift it over here. I wish more people talked that way. It would help reduce the strategy gap, but there's still a long way to go on that.
You're absolutely right. This is one pain area which repeats in every organization.
Yeah, I think the only I don't even know if it's a framework, but the best example I can think of is back the Franklin Covey, the disciplines of execution, and there's all the different aspects of that. But the common uh, example that anybody would recognize is the JFK when he said, "I want to send a man to the moon and back by the end of the decade." Right? It's following that comprehension of the SMART goals, where it's he doesn't just want to send someone to the moon. You want to make sure they get back, and it's actually by a certain time period. So that's not uniform across everybody, but it's more so the components I think that are uniform based off of where you sit within the organization. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to dig into your experience more in, for lack of a better term, legacy or traditional industries. From talking to other strategy leaders, normally these are some of the last industries to embrace technology, both its role in creating strategy and on the execution side. How have you embraced strategy in your role on either side of that, both on the kind of leveraging it for new strategies and then ultimately executing that strategy as well?
So that's a great point. Firstly, the world is becoming digital, and I read it somewhere that every business is now a technology first business, even a legacy business. Like I recently met a trucking vendor, and they said that we are a technology first company. And I asked them that, show me how a trucking business is a technology first company. And they showed me the cameras inside a truck, multiple cameras outside, inside, real time tracking, talking with the drivers. They're delivering the last mile delivery, and that just made me believe that a core legacy business, which is driving a truck, putting goods from one side to the another, can absolutely be digitized with the latest technologies. And they are now working on a chatbot based upon Chat GPT. I still don't understand why, but in my domain over here. I work on the insurance side, on technology, as well as on the engineering side, and we have been in business for last 150 years. So I've seen everything from latest innovative technologies to our core uh, legacy related domain. Everything's changing, everything's being digitized, but just introducing digital technology is not a strategy. The strategy really is, what can technology do to our business? Can we have that 3x in revenue or 5x in revenue? What would that strategy look like? Just introducing a technology or replacing legacy systems with new systems, that's a given that has to happen. That may not be that innovative strategy. So, Jonathan, to answer your question, in my experience, uh, firstly, change is constant, and not many people understand this. People who have been in their jobs for a long period of time, for decades, it's always harder to change that shift over there. But that's where, when we can show how our strategy will evolve, how our competitors are evolving, and if we don't change track, we may be left behind as compared to our competitors. That's where, when we introduce new technologies, introduce new markets, introduce new products, we can turn around a legacy business with the help of technology, with the help of right strategy out there in terms of revenue generation, and really turn around that business. It's easier said than done, but I think that shift is already happening. I'll give you another example. A toothbrush, an electric toothbrush, has a motor in it, has a vibrator in it, has a chip in it, has a battery in it. Just that simple toothbrush has now become really a marvel of technology, with rotary motors and sensors over there and timing devices. That's just the era we live in.
And you mentioned the idea, like if you're sitting in a room and you're, how do we 3x sales? How do we 10x sales? And let's say you come up with a strategy. I think the point that we're talking about, not directly, but I'm going to talk about it now, is that sometimes these strategies are great on paper, and it's if given the proper amount of time, they probably could be impactful. But most leadership, especially in the C-suite, are incentivized for results today. The results, like as immediate as possible, and aren't given enough time potentially to see a strategy through. Where if they did, it probably would have the result. So, what has your experience been regarding making sure that there's enough patience in the room to say, like, if we go with this strategy, you have to realize, and we have to be okay with, and this might include shareholders, it's going to take a little bit longer than you would think. It's not going to be something that'll result in 10x sales next month. It's going to take us a good 12 to 18 months, but after that, we will get there. How have you managed expectations? Because sometimes the urge is it's not working within 6 months. Let's fire this person. Let's move this around. And it's the exact opposite of what we talked about earlier, which is pulling the plug on a truly bad project or strategy is fine, but pulling it too early because you're impatient isn't so great. So how have you managed or seen that managed in your career?
Excellent point, and that's where to come up with a strategy. Let's take a hypothetical example of 3x in revenue. To come up with that strategy, a lot more goes into building that strategy. It's first understanding that is there even a market potential. When we need to do that marketing study, we may need to involve consultants, consulting reports, and studies to get that lay of the land. Second, competitor analysis. Is competitor working in that domain? Third, product analysis. What is our product? Can our product even get to that 3x level that we are really aiming for? Are we ready? Do we have a support staff in place? Then, fourth, organizational perspective. Do we have an organization behind the scenes that can help that kind of scalability? Or are we really going to trip ourselves? And then, fifth and foremost, is do we have the leaders and skills to really accomplish that? We start putting a timeline over there. Realistically, how much time is it going to take? I wish overnight in 12 months we were able to 3 times increase our revenue, but in a traditional business established over a long period of time, that's difficult. But if we have a concentrated strategy that in 3 years, this is how these steps we are going to take, these markets we will explore, these products we will launch, and then ultimately we can accomplish that. And then we set quarterly KPIs. And of course, we have to build in buffer. We have to consider risk. We have to consider failures that may happen. Attrition rate really comes into picture. Considering all of that, is it accomplishable? Then let's move forward. But many times what happens is if someone is just throwing darts in the dark or in the open and think that they will have a 3 times strategy without really doing the groundwork of building a true strategy ground up, it's just then we will be going from issue to issue to issue. Now with that said, this is a comprehensive strategy, and these kind of strategies are only built maybe once or twice every few years. There's smaller strategies as well, and those smaller strategies is someone where people can throw a dart, kill them, or work with them every few months or every few weeks as often as they want.
Yeah, I absolutely love that framework and kind of thinking through those five aspects. One thing you didn't mention as one of the key considerations, but you did mention a bit later on was risk and the concept of risk aversion. Certainly, you have experience in the insurance space, which is all about risk. Do you factor that into the strategy conversation, or is that more of an organizational culture aspect that you have to think about when you're planning and execution?
So, yes, we do think about risk, but then it also depends upon the type of business we are in. If let's say it's a technology startup I'm working with, over there the definition of risk is different than a typical insurance business or a financial business that we might be in. But it's the DNA of the organization I work in. It's the culture that anytime we create a strategy, there has to be a risk mitigation log. Now, that goes against typical intuition that if we want to really change the way or change the world, we cannot start thinking about all the risks. We have to just go there, do it, prove it, have a pilot, and see whether it's working or not. But behind the scenes, yes, because with every strategy, we are putting resources. There is money involved based upon the type of strategy. And if we are really working on that kind of investment, how much are we willing to spend? How much risk are we willing to take? Because it's not let's say a comprehensive product strategy or a market strategy can take anywhere from uh, $2 to $5 million, and I'm just putting hypothetical numbers. That's an initial investment, but then if we really want to execute on that strategy, do we have that capital? Do we need to go back to our board to get that kind of money approved? uh, on a smaller scale, it all depends upon do we have the right leaders in place to really take that risk? And it's less monetary, it's more about, do we have that energy within the department or within the organization to stay with that for a period of time and bring it to fruition? So Jonathan, to your point, yes, risk management is something which is inherent to any large strategy that we build. But then recognizing, like for example, if we are entering into hydrogen space and electrolyzers, anything around sustainability. We know it's a big unknown. We have to get there, do it, see it. Our risk appetite is different than a typical industry that we may want to enter.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that that perspective, because I mean it shows the it's not it's so simple for us to say sometimes, like, we need to execute better with strategy and so therefore do these things, but every time you're talking about the different levers that have to be pulled and the different people that have to be involved, it becomes complicated. So not to say that the work isn't valuable, it's just it is more complicated than maybe some people think it is, and sometimes some people think it's so complicated they can't actually break into it. So I guess we're looking for the happy medium, somewhere right in the middle. It's hard work, but a job worth doing. But with that, I know we can probably speak for hours on this topic, but all good things must come to an end. And for our podcast, we always ask every one of our guests the same question at the end to get their perspective. And the question we have for you is that if you could speak to yourself at the beginning of your career in strategy, what advice would you give yourself?
I'll have to think about this particular question, but that's a great question. So when I started my career as a developer, as a programmer, and I never realized how my career will morph into transformations, mergers and acquisitions, into strategy. If there's one advice I could give to myself, let's say 20 years ago, if I were to enter this domain, it's to have a holistic purview on how businesses run, how businesses operate. If 20 years ago I had an idea on how to generate revenue, how to manage a sales and marketing department, how to manage technology. At least if I had some basic information at that point of time, I think I might have evolved into a completely different person with a completely different career. That's one strategy I would do, is have a holistic overview in the business you work in and try to learn every aspect of that business.
Great. I love it. And that's certainly a testament to your continued focus on education and getting that holistic understanding of everything. So it's great to hear. Look, we appreciate your time on the show today and look forward to having more conversations in the future.
It was great to have a conversation with you, Jonathan and Joe. Thank you so much for having me. I truly enjoyed it.